It's time for GarageBand Weekly, episode 150. Yay! If I had sound effects and was a good producer, I would put those in here right now. But welcome aboard. I hope you are doing well. This show, we're going to be doing something a bit different. We're going to be talking about the last 3 years because I did the very first GarageBand Weekly show here on YouTube and Facebook back in December of 2019, in the before time, in the long, long ago. And nothing much of note's happened in the last 3 years. Definitely no global anythings, but we'll be talking mostly about GarageBand. GarageBand on your Mac, GarageBand on iOS. And when I think GarageBand, I think deep down in the cockles of my heart that the one man that can help us with this quest is the one and the only Mr. Patrick Baird from GarageBand Guide. How are you, mate?
I thought you were going to say Colin Cross. Yeah, I'm great, mate. How are you?
Dan Baker wasn't available. Colin Cross won't return my calls anymore. So it's got to be Patrick. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Old faithful.
How are things?
The list as usual. Great, Pete. Yeah, how about you, man? You good? Good morning.
Thank you. Yes, good morning and good evening to you, and hello to all the folks who are watching here live on the various platforms. We will say good day to you in a moment, but I just wanted to ask, I've got two really important questions for you, Patrick. Number one, how do I install GarageBand on my Windows PC? And number two, when is Logic Pro coming to iOS? If you could just help us with those two things up front, and then we'll move on. What do you reckon?
Well, have a good night, guys. Lovely seeing you. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, no, I did. If you missed it, by the way, you've got to catch up. Again, I'm going to do some shameless. I'm going to do some shameless GarageBand Guide promotion here right up front. But if you have not caught Patrick's latest video, you need to. Mostly so that you don't update to macOS Ventura or iPadOS 16.1 unless you really have to, which we always recommend. But also, it's got some really interesting and quirky Patrick moments in there, so you want to go and check that one out.
Thank you so much. Yes, Apple have definitely done a boo-boo again. So, yeah.
Done a boo-boo. I know, isn't it funny? Do you get those emails where it's like, oh man, you are a fanboy, you are deep in the pockets of Big Apple, and then you're like, have you listened to me talk about them on any of my videos? No, they don't do the right thing most of the time. Occasionally, they accidentally get something right, but most of the time, it's a bit of a tire fire. But we will be talking about that because, again, we'll be talking about the last 3 years and what's changed. And we are going to chop it into Mac and iOS because I've only just started using Mac. In fact, I haven't even used GarageBand on Mac for 3 years because I used to just handball everyone straight to Patrick. If they had a tricky Mac question, I'd be like, I don't know, go ask Patrick, or actually I'd say Colin Cross, and then they're like, I can't find his channel. I'm like, okay, try Patrick. It'll be fine. Let's say good day to the folks who are here live because we've got some of the usual suspects and some mobile music creators like Mobile Music Pro. Hello to you, Vortex. Hope you're doing well. Hello, Still Illa. We've got Mr. Tremor Bear, our wonderful moderator, Thomas Christ. We've got Clayton Von Kluge. He says, for some bizarre unknown reason, I was compelled to watch a couple of Patrick's old videos. And I knew nothing about him before tonight. There you go. So it must have gone into the algorithm because it knew that I was having you on the show here today.
This is probably a big shock for him now because I have no hair. And he's been watching videos where I had a lovely full head of hair. Sorry.
But yeah, well, true. Except you rarely showed yourself on camera, so there was that as well.
True.
So probably, yeah. Hello, Guzzo of Oz. G'day, Mark Bro. Hello, SM Borthwick. Mr. Gum Sixthly. Princess LDG. Joe and Barry Glenn. Andy Goldsby of the Indigo Sunsets. G'day, Tyne Noodles. Hello to you. And we've got Jade Star, who's here for Patrick the Band Guy. I hope you are doing well, Jade. So let's talk about GarageBand, and let's talk about GarageBand on Mac, because when I was preparing for this, I did my notes, and I've got a few things about iOS here, but obviously Mac is something that I'm new to. Patrick, I've watched your update videos on GarageBand Mac over the last 3 years. Has there been anything except for bug fixes and stability improvements? What have they thrown GarageBand Mac users any bones over the last few years, or has it been a bit of a wasteland of updates?
A little bit. I mean, we were talking just before you hit go there, about how kind of far back you're wanting to kind of talk about here, and certainly kind of the first half, 3/4 of 2020, there was nothing. And before that, it was even worse. There's about 18 months where there wasn't even a bug or stability update for GarageBand on Mac. So yeah, definitely slim pickings. 2020, things got up. So when it comes to GarageBand in 2020, things got a bit better. Nothing else did. And then obviously 2021, it got even more better as well. And then 2022 has been a bit of a mixed bag, probably from Mac and iOS, I'd say. But I would say Apple are maybe a little bit more focused on it than perhaps they were kind of back at the start of 2020, yeah.
Yeah, well, and look, we'll start with that because I got back in 2019, 2020, so we're talking 3 years ago. And the other thing is that both of us in that time period, I guess we need to call out, both of us quit our corporate overlord jobs and are now doing this full time as our gig.
Yeah.
So about 3 years ago, I got a couple of people that were telling me, they said, I know from reliable sources that Apple is about to kill GarageBand. And I don't know if you get this quite often from the conspiracy theorists saying, oh no, look, they haven't updated it for 6 months. They're definitely going to kill it. It's definitely going away. But they're like, oh, you're crazy for putting all your eggs in the GarageBand basket there. Apple are just going to kill it. And at the time, I didn't really understand why that would be the case. I guess, again, because for a Mac user, they hadn't updated it for quite some time. But what has actually come to Mac in the last few years that has excited you or that you think if folks aren't aware of that they should know about?
I mean, you'll be aware of it. They completely changed the kind of user interface in the back end of 2020. So really when Apple released the macOS Big Sur in 2020 is when GarageBand on Mac got a big kind of refresh in terms of how it looked, in terms of extra features that were added, and all of the kind of backlogged sound pack content that iOS users have been getting kind of every couple of months and never made its way onto GarageBand for Mac landed all at once. So it was kind of like a big, so here all is for you. And then you kind of got a big massive update then. And then they kind of steadily just in 2021, so I don't know how much you want to talk about, because 2021 is the year that Apple went absolutely mental and went, here, have all this stuff. Okay.
Every product ever.
Yeah, here's 15 sound packs. All right. But all that stuff landed on Mac kind of very soon or very quickly after it landed on iOS, which is very strange. Usually there's a very big gap between when stuff lands on both platforms. So yeah, it kind of looked a lot better than it had been looking for GarageBand on Mac. And you know, as much as people were maybe saying to you they're going to bin GarageBand and that's it, it's the end, they hadn't updated it in so long that you were kind of getting into the realms of, is this abandonware? And to go from that kind of uncertainty from someone who'd used it for years to a complete refresh, to constant content updates, and actually a bit more excitement about the program from Apple themselves. Certainly my bank balance is very happy that it's got a lot better and there's more exciting things to talk about. Yeah.
Very, very nice indeed. The folks in the chat here are saying that maybe you need a little bit more volume. So do you have the ability to turn up a little bit at your end for your volume?
Me?
Oh, you. There you go.
Did I just do a big massive rant and nobody heard it? Wow.
I think they heard it, but I think because I'm a big fat loudmouth, I think they're hearing me too loudly, and they want a little bit more Patrick in their ear holes. So yeah,
who doesn't? How about that? Is that any better? Is that? Oh, I'm clipping now. How about that? Is that better? Can you hear me better?
That sounds
now?
good. That sounds like you're not quite clipping, but you're sounding nice and beautifully compressed there. Thank you, by the way.
Shall I say that all again then? Right. Okay. So what happened was. No. Okay.
Well, it's interesting. By the way, thank you to Mobile Music Pro. Thank you, Vortex, for the kind donation. We appreciate you, my friend. It wasn't too bad. There you go. Guzzo's saying he could actually hear you, but now we're a little bit more balanced. So, for one thing, I think looking back for me, again, I started using GarageBand Mac, and I think I've said this to you before, that my only GarageBand Mac experience prior to 2020 was in the Apple Store. Whenever I go in and play with a Mac and then get scared and run out of there screaming, and it was so different to iOS. Just using Mac OS was so different to iOS, and I think, as you said there, the big overhaul with Big Sur was what I kind of call the iOSification of Mac OS. Yeah. Is that kind of fair to say as someone who used it in the before time and is now using it in the after time?
I mean, it was an interface change, so everything else stayed the same in terms of how things worked, where things were. Keyboard shortcuts all remained exactly the same. So, I mean, macOS Big Sur was very much the kind of first step in really kind of making macOS look a lot like iOS, and obviously that's kind of progressed even further with Monterey and Ventura in the last few years as well. But in terms of how you actually use it, no, nothing really changed too much. It just perhaps made it more approachable, and maybe that was Apple's plan to make it a bit more appealing for those thinking about kind of taking the jump cross-platform.
which is
Maybe.
a smart thing to do, really, because again, people like me that were scared of Mac OS and didn't get in there. And look, I only got in, and I know many people watching here and that contact me are new Mac users, like the number of people, and you only have to look at Apple's quarterly profits, which, by the way, thank you, Apple. They just announced,
Yeah.
billions of dollar profits and then put my Apple One membership up by $3. So
Oh.
nickel and diming all the way. But if you look at that, you see
Did
that
you get?
the
Sorry to interrupt. Did you get?
no.
Obviously, they announced a lot of new kind of iPads and Macs and stuff. Have you seen a massive increase on the kind of how much they're asking for those in Australia specifically, or is it about the same?
Yeah, it is. Like, there's definitely a lot more of it going on, a lot more Mac love, and a lot more people switching from PC to Mac and asking me about it. Even people just in the real world, as opposed to our little bubble of music creation folks. Yeah, a lot of people seem to be going towards the Mac, and again, if you can get hold of them, because obviously there've been supply chain issues and other things as well. But a lot of love for the Mac, and I think the M1 kind of made the difference. I know you're using the Mac Mini M1, which I believe still, and that was my first ever Mac, and I know that folks like Thomas Christ and Mark Bro and many of the regulars around here that probably had not used Macs at all or much, just kind of made the switch. And a lot of folks that were on Windows like me and fighting that battle of iOS and Windows trying to make them work well, which Apple never really let you do, even if you wanted to try. Now
By
that
design,
we're a part of it. Yeah, we're part of the Mac ecosystem, and it just makes it so much nicer. So,
I think
yeah,
that kind of back end of 2020 was such a massive turning point for Apple in terms of not just for kind of in terms of software updating and things like that, but from a hardware perspective, here came these entry level Apple Silicon equipped Macs that were like absolutely smoking Intel based Macs that cost like 3 or 4 times the value of a M1 Mac Mini, for example. It's absolutely crazy. I still think Apple didn't mean to make them quite so good as they did, because they've kind of cannibalized sales. I mean, I know a few people have kind of grabbed M2 iPads, for example, but I haven't seen too many people, or certainly haven't seen in the wild many M2 MacBook Airs. I don't know if that's the same for you. See quite a lot of the M1 models still, and I would still absolutely recommend that. Haven't seen too many M2 models. But I think certainly the end of 2022 was a big turning point for Apple, and accessibility, how easily people were able to access kind of hardware anyway.
Yeah, no, it is true, because again, just a year earlier, I wasn't even in the market. I joked with you and I joked around. I'm coming for you one day, Patrick. I'm going to start doing GarageBand Mac stuff, and then I looked at GarageBand Mac and went, "Yeah, no, I'm not, really not." But yeah, for now, like, despite the fact that I still don't use GarageBand Mac very much, I probably should use it more, and I did buy Logic, even though I don't use that very much either. It is so accessible, like you say, and I've learned that having a Mac it actually opens up a whole bunch of other things in terms of doing this sort of thing, doing live streaming and doing a lot of my workflow, and it's just so much easier when you're all part of that. And look, that's exactly what Apple wants, isn't it? If people wanted to put on their conspiracy glasses, they'd say, "Oh, they're getting you into their ecosystem. You're drinking the Kool-Aid, and you're in the App Store. You bought the apps, and you got to do everything that Apple tells you in the way they tell you," which is true. But it's like, if I'm going to be held hostage and be prisoner, they treat me nicely. They feed me well, and they let me go out for walks during the day sometimes. So as far as being captive prisoner of Apple, it's quite pleasant. I'm quite enjoying it. We'll get into iOS.
There, like Pete, I think.
I know, right? 100%, 100%. We'll get into iOS in a bit, by the way, because I know a lot of folks are into their iOS stuff as well. And we'll talk about iPad. Got a question there from Mr. Gumby about that. But if you do have questions, by the way, anything Mac related right now that you want to ask Patrick, please do throw it in the chat. Just put a big Q in front of it. Makes it easier for us to spot. My question for you is, should everyone be going to an M1 now? Do you think that the days of the Intel-based Macs are limited with the updates that we've had? Because I think Ventura can still run on a non-M1, but I've heard reports from folks that it's very much optimized for M1 now, and they're having more issues with their older hardware. Is that just that the older hardware was kind of shite compared to what we've got now? And is it worth in someone's Christmas list saying, "Yeah, I do need to upgrade to something M1"? Or are people absolutely okay to still keep creating in GarageBand Mac on an Intel.
And you still can, absolutely can. I think the writing's on the wall in terms of how Apple plan to kind of move forward in terms of updates, and I don't think you'll get the same length of software support as you maybe would have done previously. They did say at that event in 2020 that it was a 2-year turnaround for when they wanted to transition all of their lineup or most of the lineup to be Apple Silicon machines, and they haven't quite got there yet. They're still the Mac Pro still hasn't kind of got an Apple Silicon chip. It's still Intel. There's still a Mac Mini model that you can buy that is an Intel Mac Mini that nobody should be buying that. But I mean, it depends on. I mean, especially now because obviously in the US, new hardware, Apple hardware, is staying the same price. In the UK, we've seen a big increase in kind of the base price of a lot of these, a lot of iPads and Macs as well. I think that will just set to continue. So obviously price is a consideration. It also was really easy to recommend to people which one to go for when it was just the M1 chip, whereas now Apple have done what Apple do, and they've used marketing to muddy the waters no end. You've got M1 Pro, Max, Ultra, M2, M2 Pro, M1 Max, and it's just really hard for a layman or a regular consumer who isn't as obsessed with this stuff as idiots like I am, to make a kind of good purchasing decision, and it's harder to make a recommendation now. I would say, obviously, if your budget allows, go for an Apple Silicon machine, because you're just going to get it's going to last a lot longer than an Intel machine. But Intel machines are not useless yet.
Not yet, yeah, exactly. I think as Thomas says here, I think they'll slowly phase out support over about 5 years. Yeah, I think you're right, Thomas. I think you'll probably see till 2025, 2026, around that. That's what we've seen previously with iOS and with Mac, that, some of the older gear, they kind of leave it there. And to be honest, Apple are actually pretty decent. I know a lot of people bag Apple for like, every year you have to buy a shiny new device. But even if, like, I've got my iPad Air 2, which I know you have as well. We both love our Air 2s. They won't ever get another update past 15.7. But Apple are committing for the next couple of years to security updates, at least for 15, for older devices. And they did the same for older devices stuck on 12 for quite some time. I think it's only the ones stuck on 9 that you probably shouldn't be using too much. But if you're rocking an iPad 2 these days on iOS 9, it might be time for an upgrade. I think there's probably a better option.
Ventura's 2017 Max, or some models of 2017 Max. So it's not, it is about, what's that, 5 years? So
which is good. Right. So do think that. Do think in terms of that. But if you like me, again, I used my iPad Air 2 for about 5 years until I bought my iPad Pro 2020. And we'll talk iPads in a moment. But to your point, the M1 and the M2, until I see some software that's actually going to make use of that chip, I'm pretty comfy right now, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. We've got one day there'll be a hybrid device. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because this is a bit of a crossover thing. But Patrick, why, for the love of your deity of choice, well, as do I, because I think it's not Apple's way, but why, as Apple, have they not brought out a touchscreen MacBook that's a tablet? I mean, Windows have done these, Lenovo have these, HP have these that are the transformative ones that you fold over, and they've got the keyboard on one side, and then they've got a nice touchscreen. They could run a hybrid device with iOS and macOS with an M1 chip. They could launch that tomorrow, and people would love it. Why, why will they never do it?
Because Apple love money, obviously. I mean, you need to remember, Apple's a company, and the whole sole point of them is to make profit. And Apple would far prefer you to buy a Mac and an iPad than buy an iPad that runs Mac OS. It's as simple as that. It is frustrating because you can see how good their hardware is, and you can see that they are limiting the use of that hardware via insufficient software. As good as, I think Mac OS is pretty good, but iPad OS, especially from things like a music production standpoint, there are things that they could put in place and they could do that would make our lives so much easier from an operating system standpoint, and they just won't do it because that's for the Mac. So, it's frustrating, but I think, it's not a good business decision to make one product that people will buy when at the moment they can encourage you to buy 2 products.
Yeah, they can have the whole collection and the whole set because I was thinking that the other day. I'm like, these big new watches that they have, they are almost taking over the phone. But if you notice, they haven't quite done everything on an iPhone.
Yeah.
So they've definitely said no, you can't just have the new Ultra watch. You also do need to have an iPhone for these particular
very good point.
purposes.
Watch
So,
an
yeah,
iPhone,
so-
iPad, and Mac. Yeah, it's
Yeah, exactly. It's
complementary
on the go.
devices. Is that the correct term? Yeah.
Complimentary. There you go. And as Ed says, just wait for the apps that require you to run both Mac and iPad at the same. Oh my gosh, yes. Can you imagine
Don't
that? It's
even
like you have
say
to
that
have
out loud, Ed. Jeez, Tim will be
someone from
listening
Apple
to
is
this,
watching.
getting ideas.
They're scribbling down on their new iPads with their Apple Pencil ones. Oh no, wait, they're not because they forgot their dongle and they haven't charged it in time. So they've missed that note.
Apple loves money.
Apple do love money. So M1 and 2 silicon-based processors do not work for programming, though. My computer science pals say that the M1 heats up a lot when okay. I'm far from a developer, so I don't know, but wouldn't surprise me that the developer. Well, Apple do okay with developers, but I don't know. Talk to a developer and see whether they like what Apple do for them. Maybe not.
Yeah, that's a good point.
My wife has a 2018 Mac Pro and would hang up a lot using Big Sur. Had to downgrade. Yeah, right. So I guess if you're on 2018 hardware even and you're on Big Sur, which is only the last version, it's only a 3-year-old bit. But I think again it's the curse of the Intel. John Liner, who we were talking about just before the show. G'day, John. I managed to have a beer with John. Patrick was asking John if you came all the way to Australia just to hang out with me, and if so, that's a bit creepy. But no, I said he had some story
I did
about
not say that.
family holiday.
How dare you?
I know. That was setting confidence. I did say to Patrick one day, I'm just going to hit the go live button for our pre-show chat, and I think that will get the highest ratings of any video either of us have ever put out. Because
cancelled overnight. Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a question. Let's get back on track before Patrick never comes on the show again. When I research the App Store for Mac or iPad plugins, they don't show up. However, if I click a link from Jade, it goes straight to the app. What am I doing wrong? When I search the App Store. What do you think Guzzo's asking here, Patrick? For plugins?
I mean, is it just? It's not a very good way to search. You need to put in the precise name, precise spelling, precise spacing of the name of the app. It's not like a search engine. You need to put in the exact name. That's the same on both Mac and iOS, and it's really annoying. That's why. Yeah. If we're talking about apps, you'll try and put links in descriptions of videos and things because it just makes it easier for folks to get to it than. Also, you'll find that if an app or plugin won't run on your device, it just won't show up.
Yes.
Common on iOS.
That's a good point. Famously, GarageBand disappeared from the App Store for folks on iOS 12 when Apple launched iOS 13. Because as soon as you updated as soon as they updated the version of GarageBand to iOS 13, if you were running iOS 12 and you searched GarageBand, it just would show nothing, which is not a great way. And I think eventually they updated it to say this requires iOS 16, but iOS 13. But for a long, I had to do a video about it to show people how to go to your App Store and go to your previously purchased apps and find it and download it, because even though you can download a previous version that works on your device, you cannot do that from the App Store. You can only do that from your own app library, which is kind of insanity. Someone sent me a search screen one time where they typed garage space band, 0 results. You remove that space and GarageBand pops straight up. Again, I think they've fixed that now. But
pernickety as that, yeah.
It's ridiculousness. And so if you're trying to find something like Grand Finale, Cleveground just updated Grand Finale on iOS, and I searched for it the other day, and again, it's too much of a generic term. It won't come up. You have to type Cleveground Grand Finale 2 spaced and correct, otherwise it won't come up. So it's a pain that many of us go through, Guzzo. And you know what I actually do these days is instead of going to the App Store and searching, I go to Google and I search App Store and the name of the app, and then it will bring up the page. You click that and that takes you to the App Store for that page. So that's probably another tip there, rather than going and searching the App Store and its terrible search engine.
Such a terrible Apple, it just works, kind of.
Yes, exactly. A question. I know that many people wanted to ask that, but afraid to. How do we find the FNF music? How do you like the FNF music made in GarageBand? And do you even know about this rhythm game? I don't. I don't even know what that rhythm game is. Do you know anything about the FNF music mode?
I'm 38. No. Sorry. I'm old.
Is that like trap? I know what trap is now. Does that help? No, I'm not sure. Sorry. So, but
Is
you
that
asked
an
two old
808?
blokes.
I don't know.
Yeah, oh, maybe. There you go. Yeah, a question from Mike at Creative Source is will
Mike.
Thunderbolt interfaces work with my new iPad Pro M2? What is the latest on that? We'll sort of use this to merge across onto iOS because we've got a lot of iPad questions and comments here. So have you checked into that? Because I know that there was a note on the new iPads that said they will support other audio interfaces outside of USB. Has that been implemented yet? Have you seen anyone testing
That wasn't
it?
what that meant. Yeah, Apple
No?
got back to me. That wasn't what that meant. It was a specific type of connection that they were referring to. They actually changed the wording in the update notes after that. Because they realised
that's
that
bad news.
they got everybody really excited for no reason. I am not sure about the M2. I don't have an M2 iPad. I don't know.
Because it does have a Thunderbolt port. So technically you would say it does have a Thunderbolt port, but we were getting all excited because it did say non-class compliant, didn't it? And I think everyone we lost our minds and said, oh, this is going to mean that your Thunderbolt interfaces, all of your legacy stuff that uses drivers, you're going to be able to use. And I was a little skeptical because I didn't think Apple would ever want to do anything like install drivers on a iOS device. So I would say that if it uses custom drivers, the chances of it ever working on iPad are slim to none. Would that be fair to say without destroying Mike's?
Point, yes.
Sorry, Mike.
Sorry, Mike.
If anyone has anything that contradicts that, then please let us know because we haven't tried it, but I would be surprised. I know Jade Star just bought the new M2 iPad, so maybe Jade, if you want to, spend a couple of grand and get a 8-channel Thunderbolt interface just to plug into it, just so that you can answer our question, that'd be awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks. You're onto it. Good. Alrighty. So yeah, well, let me just check that we've covered everything on Mac. So yeah, in terms of what's changed in the last 3 years, and I guess the high level overview of that, is it fair to say that interface wise things have changed a little bit with the sort of Big Sur update there, bug fix and stability improvements out the wazoo, and outside of that it's really been about the sounds. The different packs that we've had in iOS have been shipped over in content. No fundamental changes to GarageBand, no cool new features or anything different that's been added that
not really. Again, I mean, much the same way on iOS. It's more sound content that's been added, and then a lot of the excitement comes from the third-party stuff that you can bring into the DAW and play with in there. But in terms of the actual utility of it, no, not a lot has actually changed. Which, I mean, is a good thing and maybe a bad thing for those looking for a bit more functionality. But then you can understand why that isn't the case on Mac, especially because you have got the next step up, which is Logic Pro. So.
And as we've talked about, Apple like money. They want you to buy Logic as soon as you're done with GarageBand. Very
to be
cool.
fair, Logic is fantastic. So I mean, it's not. It's not that. It could be worse. You could be. It could be Cubase. It could be worse.
It could. Poor Steinbeck. It could be worse. It could be Cubase. Oh, they try. They do their very best. All right. We got some more questions coming in, which we'll get to in just a moment. So, yeah, so for me, by the way, I actually think that there isn't... I know that people get... I don't know if you've seen all of the videos, and we'll use this as a transition over to iPad and iOS. If you've seen all the videos that are just like, Apple, what are you doing? Apple dropped the ball on this one. The worst iPad ever. And all these grumpy men looking at iPads going, grrr, because they didn't change much between last year's and this year's. My opinion on this is we're at the point now where we don't need a revolution. We need an evolution. We are already at the point where these pieces of glass that sit on our desks are freaking amazing. And I don't think that changing them fundamentally... And you know what? If they change them fundamentally, if the next iPad came out and it was a circular design somehow, because who knows, that's what Apple like to do. If you had a circle iPad, everyone would be complaining, I can't believe Apple went away from the rectangular iPad. Now they've got these circle iPads. So do you think that there's another revolution to come in terms of our Mac and iPad world, or is it just going to be iterative like it has been the last few years?
I don't know. I mean, from what I've heard, to get into the weeds of chips and stuff like that, the M1 and M2 are 5nm chips, and you'll see another, because the M2 is a step up from the M1, but it's not the revolutionary increase in performance that M1 was over Intel chips and over the A14 or what was the last A chip that was the top end one? Was it A14?
15 did they just sneak
A15X?
into? Yeah.
Yeah, so there was maybe less of a huge update there. But when Apple changed to 3 nanometer chips as opposed to 5 nanometer chips is when you'll see another big leap in performance, or certainly a bigger leap in performance. A lot of chatter about the M2 iPad Pros are great. Jade, I'm not saying your iPad sucks. I saw you use it in that video. It's amazing, but I don't know if Apple put this update out to the iPad Pro specifically because they maybe felt like they had to refresh a little bit, and obviously they had the M2 chip there. So certainly, I think, I mean, that design is what, are we 5 years old now? 4 years old now. 2018 was that when that first kind of iPad Pro that's now the iPad Air came out?
The squared off corner iPad Pro with the USB-C. Yeah, that was 2018.
So I think certainly that's possibly due some kind of update or updated design, possibly. What that would be, I'm not sure. Hopefully, it will be more than just a slightly better chip inside. But I mean, the kind of the new base model iPad. What did you make of that? Because that's a very strange, to me anyway. It's a very strange product for Apple to bring out. Really,
it really is. And if you're not familiar, by the way, like I think Patrick and I have both done videos on all of the different iPads. And look, it's more complex than it's ever been before. If you thought Macs were difficult to work out what to buy, iPads are ridiculous now, because the story used to be that there was the iPad and the iPad Mini. So if you wanted the big one, you'd buy the iPad. You wanted the small one, you'd buy the Mini, and it was as simple as that. They were almost exactly the same specs. The iPad was slightly better spec than the iPad Mini. Apple then brought out the iPad Pro, and they're like, here, this one's for pros. And we're like, okay, cool. So the iPad Pro. Okay. They then brought out the iPad Air, and they're like, this is somewhere in between the iPad and the Pro if you want something a little bit more. But what Patrick's referring to is the latest one that they've brought out, which is the new iPad. Looks like and has almost the exact same specs as the iPad Air 4th generation before it, but it's being called the iPad to replace the 9th generation, which is still being sold, which is still a current model. So it really does make no sense. I just think it means that it's the end for the iPad Air. I don't think they're going to continue with that product line after this. I would be very surprised if we see a new iPad Air, because this is the exact same design. It's using those same Pro-style rounded off corners, and it's got the USB-C port on there. It's basically identical to the iPad Air, except that they finally put the camera in landscape mode in the center of the iPad.
Yeah.
And I don't
because
see
they moved the camera, they can't use the new pencil. They have to use the 1st generation pencil, which you need a dongle for to charge. It's just
which we talked about. Yeah, so they were very happy. They're just like, oh, it's the 10th generation. You can use the Apple Pencil 1. And it was like, but that charges by light. If you've never seen the Apple Pencil 1, it's ridiculous. It charges by lightning. You have to plug it into the bottom of your iPad, and it just precariously dangles and waves about in the wind. And then you can't charge your iPad while your pencil's charging. So you have to decide if your iPad's running out and you need to write something. It was kind of flawed to begin with. Now it's more flawed because you have to take a dongle with you to convert the lightning port, lightning to USB-C to plug into your bottom of your iPad, which you then, of course, still can't charge while you're charging the pencil, and there's no other way to do that. So yeah, all of that aside, though, I actually do think I had a question this week from someone saying, if you were just wanting to use GarageBand on an iPad right now, what is the best iPad to get? And I honestly still think for $329, and I know it's more for us in Australia and the UK and Europe because the dollar exchange rates and all that sort of thing, but I still think that this is the best all-rounder. I think it was Bear that said before, he wants, where's my headphone jack? And it's like, yeah, this is going to be if you want a headphone jack on an iPad, I think this one here is the very last iPad ever that will have lightning, and it's the very last iPad ever that will have a headphone jack. I think the writing's on the wall with the European Union coming out and saying you need to have USB-C, so it's not going to be there. So I honestly think that that's the best buy right now. If you're just running GarageBand and you're not a power user that needs all the shininess of the M2, but it's still Lightning though, so you will have to use all those clunky Lightning adapters, because I must say one of the good changes in the last 3 years in my list here around iOS is the hardware side. It's the fact that we have USB-C on our iPads now, because I don't know about you and in your experience connecting stuff, but I find it so much nicer with USB-C. Have you found the same?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's that camera connection kit was just a nightmare, and then you have to add a USB dongle and a dock and it's just a nightmare. Whereas you can just plug it straight into the USB slot and it just works like you'd expect it to. I think you're
It
absolutely
does.
right. I don't think that iPad 9th generation is going to be around next year. So if you want
No.
it, get it because it's going to go. I think.
Get it now. Exactly. Do it now. Still Illa says my wife just bought the iPad 9th Gen, my first one. I love it. Just bought me first one and I love it. Yeah. Look, if you're getting your first iPad, if you've never used an iPad before and you're getting your first iPad, I think it's a great choice. It's still a 10-inch screen. It still has, I think it's got the A14 chip in there that we are talking about before,
Yeah.
so it still has a lot of power. It's going to be absolutely fine for you for a considerable period of time. So, yeah, I would go with that if you're not fussed about the whole USB-C side of things. So what's in terms of GarageBand, so we've obviously gone off
Yes.
into the hardware
It's about
side of
GarageBand,
things.
isn't it? Yeah, let's start
It is
talking
about
about that again.
GarageBand.
Sorry
We'll talk about
that.
it. We got that is fine. No, it's all related, isn't it? And we will go back to. I've got some questions that I'm tagging here. The Falcro, I've got your question. Princess LDG, I've tagged your question. So we'll answer those. We'll do a Q&A. But just to kind of cover off on GarageBand in iOS, what have you seen in the last 3 years in terms of the evolution of GarageBand iOS?
Much in the same way as Mac. I mean, in terms of utility and what you can do with the actual kind of bones of the app, there's not been too many massive improvements, but not changes really in terms of features. And I know that's something that we've bemoaned many times over the last few years. That it's great to get lots of new sounds, but maybe could you take away auto normalization? Maybe. Having said that. In the last few years, the amount of content and the amount of money that Apple have thrown at GarageBand in terms of licensing and things like that. Fair enough, not everybody's going to want to use a Lady Gaga remix project, but the fact that they've obviously invested in the app is a really good sign. I think we mentioned 2021 was the year that Apple went absolutely crazy. I have it written down here. So in 2021, Apple released for GarageBand iOS, where am I? 4 new sound packs,
Yes.
8 producer packs, 2 remix projects, and they released the M1 iPad Pros that year as well. So in terms of, if you think
Massive.
about like the volume of stuff, the amount of stuff that they released onto GarageBand that year is just mental. It's crazy. I remember at the time it was just, what are you doing? Have you gone mad?
It's and I mean, look, the joke, the in joke that I know we all talked about was, oh, good, another pack. I needed more 808s in my life because they were fairly similar in their style. But look, the negative side of me said, Apple, are you going for quantity over quality here? And the positive side of me said, Apple clearly have not done what my friend told me they would do 4 or 5 years ago and abandoned GarageBand. If anything, they're making sure that it's updated, even though the updates are little tiny incremental ones for each iOS version from 13 through to 16 in the last 3 years. They have changed it every time, and they've added a few little things. I mean, what did we get? The time ruler, so you can actually see how long your project is in minutes and seconds. Whoa, I know, I was waiting for that one. But I was honestly looking back at the features because I do a review, and as do you, of every update. And that's kind of all I could find that was actually a useful new feature that wasn't just a sound pack or wasn't just anything, which is fine because we already have Alchemy synths. We already have a lot of other things. So, yes. Have I missed something? Is there anything else cool?
They changed the sampler in 2020 as well.
They
and
did
too.
They
changed the drum pads and some of the icons in 2020. That was the last time there was any big feature change. Yeah.
That is right. Yeah, I remember. Yes. Feature, yes, yeah, that's right. And since that day, I think I get a question about 3 times a week, which is, I can't find how to import a sample in the sampler because I've got 15 videos about the sampler and they all show where the import button is, and they've just moved it just slightly into another layer of menu. So now nobody can find it. So I guess that was one of the changes that was. But yeah, so slightly, and you're right, they did kind of, like they do, they changed the style of the button. So they went from more of that realistic style to the, I don't know what they call it, but that sort of cartoony, skeuomorphic. There you go. I knew there was a fancy word for it that I hadn't remembered. Yes, feature changes in GarageBand. Do you think that there needs to be? Here's the question, and we'll talk about Logic on iOS in a moment because that's everyone's favourite topic. But what do you think's missing? So auto normalization is the devil, as Dan Ekberg said before, and I think many people can agree with that. Look, that. I have not spoken to Apple very many times, but in the maybe 2 or 3 conversations I've had in my life, despite the fact that people think I'm, in being paid by big Apple money, I've said to them on both occasions, could you please do us a solid and just put that button like you have on Mac where it says turn auto normalization off? It can't be. Like, I know that there's probably spaghetti code in there from 2011 that they're trying to work through, but it can't be that hard to add that feature. Is that the number one thing you're hearing or that you would want changed about GarageBand iOS?
I mean, yeah, it's strange that you could understand them withholding features if there was a more advanced music production app to move onto the Apple created. Like they do the whole GarageBand and Logic thing on Mac. You've got limitations in GarageBand. If you hit that kind of feature ceiling and you need more, you've got Logic to move on to. You don't have that on iOS. I don't know if they would think that, oh, I'm hitting a feature ceiling in iOS. I'm going to buy a £2,000 Mac and buy Logic. Which is maybe a bit silly. So I don't understand why they would withhold features that are present in the Mac version, like turning off auto normalization or allowing you to automate panning or automate kind of the controls of plugins that you have attached, things like that, basic stuff. There doesn't seem to be any reason for it. And no, I don't think there can't be any kind of programming limitations to the reason why they can't do that, because the code base is incredibly similar for GarageBand on Mac and GarageBand on iOS. GarageBand on iOS was originally just they tweaked the UI of GarageBand on Mac and made it much simpler for the first iOS release of it, but it was, in terms of code, it wasn't any different. So it's more frustrating than anything else when you realize that they could just easily add that one feature, auto normalization, that everybody asks them for, but they've chosen not to, and instead they'll put their time and kind of money into kind of getting a Korean boy band to submit a track that we can remix. It's just it's a bit weird. Isn't it?
You didn't enjoy remixing 7, or is that the name of the yeah?
17, Pete. Don't pretend
17. Sorry,
you know.
Is it spelt with a 7 instead of a V? Because that's how the cool kids are spelling everything.
If you were to pan your camera back slightly, would see the posters all over the back of that wall. 17.
17. I love them.
Almost
J Money's my favourite one. Yeah. Sion's here, and he's got some good points there. He's talked about padding automation and MIDI exporting, buses. A lot of people are saying they would love to see some buses. And look, I think a lot of these things are unlikely to be added again because they are some of the stuff that's in GarageBand Mac I think is more likely, but Apple are definitely on the side of, and look, it's changed. My hope is that since Johnny Ive and now Johnny Ive's 2IC, both the design people that basically were Steve Jobs' right-hand people that said no, form over function every time, which is why we got things like the touch bar at the top of the MacBook and why we got the removal of the headphone jack and all the things that you don't like about your Apple device in the last 10 years are because of Johnny Ive and his design team have said, no, we don't want 3 buttons, we want 1 button because less is more. No, not true. But an interesting one is rename GarageBand. That's an interesting one. And I've probably never thought about it in terms of that. And I don't think Apple ever will do that because of the brand recognition. But it is something that I fight against, that people are like, oh, are you only using GarageBand? It's definitely something that's looked down upon. Do you as the GarageBand guide guy, do you find that? Do you get people saying, why do you use GarageBand? It's a toy?
Less than I used to, I think. I think because, especially on iOS, because a lot of kind of young producers kind of come up using it in school and stuff like that, and it's not really something that you would point and laugh and say, "Ha, you're using GarageBand." Who said this to me the other day? It was John Orrell, I think, maybe in the shameless plug GarageBand users Facebook group. Possibly said this to me the other day, but this was more for a differentiation. Is that a word? Differentiation.
I think so. Sounds good.
A word. Cool. Between the iOS version and the Mac version more than anything else, because I mean, obviously, you will be very much aware that whenever somebody asks a question about GarageBand, the first comment is usually, "Are you using the Mac version or the iOS version?" So having changing the name for that reason, absolutely. I I don't know if you'd want to change the name of it to give in to people thinking that it's something like a toy or something. That seems like
Yeah.
a very strange way to a very strange reason to change the name of a product that, in some form or another, has been around for 18 years. It just seems
Yeah.
a bit silly.
Yeah, look,
Like Logic Light or something like that.
well, yeah, well, that's the ideas we're getting in here. Logic SE, says Thomas Christ, which you could go with.
Oh,
So yeah,
yeah.
they could go down the LE, the Cubasis route and Cubase route, where they've got LE after the name of their products. Maybe, yeah, I know. I also think that it would have been better if they named it something different back in the day. But it really was designed for, like, it wasn't that not that great, but it was more of like a jam tool for writing demos. I think over the last
Yeah.
18 years, it has evolved into a fully fledged production suite that you can make pro music with. But originally it was, it was 16-bit audio. It was limited to 16 tracks, at least on the iOS version for the longest time. So yeah, there were limitations in there that did mean that you probably wanted to start creating in GarageBand, and maybe if you were a very professional, quote unquote, then you moved into Logic or you moved into Cubase or something else after the fact. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the brand recognition and the name recognition they get surpasses any benefit they'd get from a new name now. No, it's interesting. Again, this is all just interesting to speculate about, to think about anyway. So,
And nobody's sitting here saying that you should only create using GarageBand. That should be the be all and end all. However good you get at production and stuff, stick with GarageBand. There's obviously going to be a point where, or for many people, there'll be a point where you will need to move on. It doesn't have all the features that you may require if you then find that you need to, for example, need some form of buses, or if you need advanced editing options or things like that. Nobody's saying that you should limit yourself just because you should stick with GarageBand. But not everybody's going to need that kind of to move on to that professional level of audio production. If you don't want to get stuck in the weeds of kind of the minute details of how to do all the little intricate changes you need to do to I don't know, to a track, if you want to do it, if you're quite happy just creating music that you're able to make sound good and then release, then it's perfect for you. But yeah, nobody's sitting here saying you have to use GarageBand.
You're forced to. Oh yeah, no. I think I saw your video. Wasn't it 10 reasons why you're a complete fool if you do use anything but GarageBand? I think that was one that you released recently. And I would go a step. Do it. I would go a step further and say, for some people, they simply shouldn't update to a new piece of software, because I've seen the problem where it actually makes your music worse. So I've seen people that have been using GarageBand for years. They get Logic, they get completely overwhelmed and lose their ever-loving mind because they don't understand buses and they don't understand automation of different things. So, and they don't get all the features, and they end up putting Logic back into that Logic Light mode where you go back to GarageBand and they end up not using any of the features. And I'm like, that's a pretty good indication. If you're using the light mode in Logic, it's a pretty good indication that you probably should have stuck with GarageBand and maybe mastered a few things there before, because I think a bit like gear, some people think that, if I go from a $200 interface to a $1,000 interface, or if I go from a $100 microphone to a Shure SM7B, I'm suddenly going to become 4 times better because I've spent 4 times as much, and it's just not the case. In fact, sometimes
Is that not the case?
because funny about that. Shit. You're getting it all wrong, mate. Yeah.
Oh no! This is it. I'm going to take all this stuff back tomorrow. Back to the shop.
all the kit back to the shop. Go back to your iPad 2 with the 30-pin connector adapter plugged into it, and you'll be good to go. I've come a long way from 30-pin. I know. I've got one.
I have one.
I have a series of docks that I had for my original iPods and iPhones that all have 30-pin, and I'm like,
docks.
These would be wonderful for nobody ever. So. We've got a bunch of questions. We've been surprisingly ranting a lot. Back in my day, back in the 30-pin days. So not surprisingly, we have been ranting here, and we have a heap of questions that are backlogged here. So let's do a bit of quick-fire Q&A and get into some of these. So Mr. Gombe, so do I get the M1 12.9 Pro for Christmas, or do I wait for the new M2 12.9? In terms of the iPad, well, the new M2 is out. So you can get that. In fact, it's the only one you could buy new. It has superseded the M1. But the M1 iPad, I don't know your view on this, Patrick, but the M1 iPad Pro is still amazing, and you could probably pick up a good one refurbed right now, because all the people that need the new shininess have gone for them. There you go. Jump onto Amazon and eBay.
Want to get rid of their stock because they'll have new M2 stock in. So yeah, if you were hanging on for an M1 iPad and you don't feel, you're you're not going to need the power of an M2 probably. Yeah, save some cash and grab a deal on a excuse
Yep.
me, on an M1 iPad Pro and Black
Yes.
Friday sales. Yeah.
There you go, Black Friday just around the corner. And do keep in mind that there is a difference with the size. So size does matter of your storage. So the 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes have 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the lower ones only have 8. And when I say only have 8, I still haven't seen an app that even uses close to 8
No.
gigabytes. So
No.
I wouldn't use that as a deciding factor. But if you're buying one iPad for the next 10 years and you want to totally future proof yourself, then yeah, just consider that. Maybe get the extra cash to go for the bigger one. Yeah, and Mobile Music Pro, said exactly that. You can get refurbished iPads for cheap. A lot of people missed that option, that you don't have to buy the new shininess. Last year's model and 2 years ago's models are still very good. And the same goes for Macs. Anything silicon, I would still recommend the original Mac Mini M1. Just don't buy the Intel one, but the Mac Mini M1. I've got the base model still, and I want to update. It's kind of like my iPad. I want to update. I want the new shininess, but I simply can't justify it. When I look at the pros and cons, all the pros are, it's new and shiny. Stage Manager looks like a thing, but the cons are, you have a perfectly good working iPad, and it would be a complete waste of your money. But that's just me. Maybe I'll just get the shininess anyway. Omni Collective Creativity. What's the best way to layer arpeggios in GarageBand without being overwhelmed with changing MIDI notes for hours to make it sound good? Do you play around with the arps, the arpeggiators in GarageBand, and do any cool stuff with that?
A little bit. I mean, the GarageBand's built-in synths and stuff it's a fairly basic arpeggiator. I'm trying to think if there's any apps that you could use. I don't know if this would help, literally just before joining this, I was watching Jade Starr use Scalar 2, which has got some really cool features, which actually she was able to layer up lots of different sounds all at the same time, which I'm pretty sure you could work that to have them all arpeggiated. Yeah, search for that video. I don't know if she's still... There you go. I think she's in the chat. If she wants to stick a link to her video, that might show you what you need.
Yeah, cool.
And
Jade is here.
I believe.
Very cool. I've not played around with it, but I definitely should be. But yeah, Jade is here in the chat. So just go to Jade Star's channel. There she is there. Go to Jade Star How to App on iOS, and you will be able to find her video on that. Because yeah, I think that it is like the GarageBand arpeggiator is good. Has a couple of flaws. One is that you can't use an external MIDI keyboard with the GarageBand arpeggiator for reasons unknown, just because. So you have to actually touch the notes on the touch screen if you're using iOS, and they've only got very limited. So there's a random, there's an up and down, and there's an up or a down. So to Omni Collective Creativity's question, if you want to create some more intricate patterns, the other thing is, remember that you only need to do it once. If you're doing an arp, you only need to do it once and then loop it. So if you're doing something for 8 bars, but it's the same thing, just do 1 bar of it and get the pattern right, and then loop that out for the other 7 bars. So there's smart ways to do that if you want to as well. Do you use IDAM? I don't know what IDAM is. Do you, Patrick? This is another question.
Google,
I'm feeling very old. Apparently, identity access management is one of them. So no, unless that's something that will stop me getting hacked by you. In which case, yes, I use it, a very secure version of it. And it's also quality pipes and fittings is another IDAM. So idam.com.au for all your quality fitting needs. So. If anyone knows what IDAM is and uses it, then feel free to.
It is something.
It is?
If that helps. Yes, it turns your iPhone or iPad synthesizer apps into sound modules for DAWs on macOS.
There you go.
Thank you, Synthanatomy.
There you go.
I've never used it. No, I've never used
clearly, Patrick and I never have, but if anyone else has or has recommendations or thinks it's cool, then go ahead. Rena here. Hi, Rena. Pete here. What would you recommend? Do you use one for Choir Sound, a voice app that is safe to download? There are some out there, but legit. A choir app. I mean, there's some decent choral sounds in the Alchemy synth and just built into GarageBand that I use if I want a bit of background choir sound. Have you ever used any other choir type apps, Patrick?
Not off the top of my head, not on iOS, no. There's a few floating about on Mac that are really good. Spitfire Labs would be the obvious one. They just released a new free instrument that was Gaelic choirs. But on iOS, I'm not 100% sure, no.
No, I'm not sure. Yeah, there's Jade showing IDAM, and I'm sure Jade, if anyone knows if there's an iOS app, because she is the How To app on iOS person, it would be Jade. So Jade, if you've got any Coral, because I know that Jade plays with all sorts of different kind of synths and AUV3 and inter-app audio sounds. So yes, Jade, if you've got a recommendation on that, we should have just got Jade on here to answer all these questions, because clearly we
I'll just
don't know
go,
anything
just
else.
get her in. Yeah, it's all right. I'll just.
This one should be easy. The Falcro. I think this is someone that needs to go and watch your most recent video about your GarageBand QRA, because can Reaper be installed and used on? See, that's an interesting. Actually, that's a variation on the theme of that question, because usually it's can GarageBand be installed on my Windows PC? Can Reaper be installed on my 10th gen iPad? I would almost definitely say no. I don't think there's an iOS version of Reaper, and you definitely can't.
Yeah.
It is. So I think there is a Mac version. I'm almost positive that you can use Reaper on Mac. So yeah, you'd need a Mac to use that. But there is, as far as I know. Although Aurea Pro is probably the closest thing to Reaper. If you're looking for one like a full-featured DAW that has all the bells and whistles, but also a very steep learning curve, which is what Reaper is, then Aurea Pro is probably what you're looking for. And that will run quite nicely on your 10th generation iPad without a problem. Pete, can't you charge the pencil connected with a powered hub with the iPad? See, I don't think the pencil has a lightning plug at the end, and to the best of my knowledge, I've never found an adapter that you can plug it into apart from the Apple one for USB-C. So I don't think you can charge it. I don't know. My daughter has one, but I've never used it, so I don't think you could plug it into anything, because you'd need a female lightning socket like is on an iPhone or an iPad.
You can get a connection. You could get a connector from Apple that would probably cost you about $50, probably.
Yeah.
Which would mean you wouldn't have to stick it in your iPad, but yeah, it's probably not.
Yeah. You could get, if you wanted it to a regular hub, you could get the Lightning to USB-C one from Apple, and then get another adapter, and then a USB-C to USB-A adapter, and then plug it into your hub. So you'd have like 3 dongles like lined up there. So just buy the Pro and get the Apple Pencil 2 that charges by just popping on the top there, and then everyone's happy. What is this is from Princess LG? What's the best and most affordable Apple laptop for someone who's never had an Apple laptop? There you go. What would you say to someone who says, I've never owned an Apple laptop?
Question. You know the answer to this question.
It's a MacBook Air M1.
Yeah, of course.
Or MacBook Air M2.
Apple, the words best and affordable when it comes to Apple laptops don't really go together. So, like the M1 MacBook Air, especially if you can get a refurbished one, will give you the best bang for your buck, almost certainly.
Yep, absolutely. So, so that's the M2 MacBook Air, which is again starting at $11.99. No.
You can't
And don't get the, if you're getting a MacBook Pro, get that MacBook Pro, not that MacBook Pro. So what they did, they've confused you. They've put the M2 chip in the old chassis MacBook Pro 13-inch, which is the one with the touch bar and the bad design, and it'll look aged the second you get it out of the box, even though it's a brand new 2022 laptop. You will regret it almost immediately. So if you're looking for an M2 right now, it's really only the MacBook Air that you can go for. There's the M2, but to Patrick's point, check around, because this one here, the M1 chip one, is probably your best bet, because you'll know if you need the M2, and it's only if you want that newer design that's on the M2. But yeah, if you're looking for affordability and it's your first ever Mac, I'm pretty sure you will not go wrong with a MacBook Air M1 chip. Yeah. I've got rid of Patrick. See. I tried to get rid of the question, and I got rid of the co-host. All righty. A question from the Falcor also. What about the Apple Pencil 2? Will it work on? Yeah, unfortunately not, unless it's a Pro or an Air, I believe also. The ones that have the ability to...
Or a Mini,
Or a Mini, the Minis have that as well. So that has to have, not the smart connector, but whatever they call that magnetic ability to charge stuff that you just sit on the side. And unfortunately, it doesn't. And it doesn't even work. So you can't even... Yeah. Even if you could charge it, they've just set it up to not work. I don't know if it's just a software thing, but it will not recognize Apple Pencil 2 on an older Apple.
What you can do is, if you don't need the extra features that come with an Apple Pencil, like the tapping to change pens and stuff like that, a third party like Logitech Crayon will work across both different types of iPads. It just uses different technology, more basic technology. But if you're using it because, like me, you've got big fat sausage fingers and you're looking for a bit more precision, then a third party pencil will work across different iPad models, no problem. and you don't have to
Yeah.
charge it by sticking it in the bottom of the iPad.
which is a big plus as well. I saw one more. Actually, I'll put this up here. I saw one more question from John Paul Music UK. Hello to you, but I can't find the
Hello,
question.
man.
So I'll throw this one up here for now. I like this from Andy Goldsmith. The big plus with GarageBand is I feel I've got to know the drummer like real friends. Logan, Carl, and Parker are like mates. Yes.
Good old Kyla, yeah.
Good old Kyle. Oh, mate, Kyle's been the butt of many jokes on many shows of Kyle. It's like, well, Kyle, yeah, you're just the default driver. Everyone starts with Kyle. Very few people let Kyle be there.
Yeah.
Kyle's like the ultimate practice guy. It's like, okay, Kyle, you done now? All right, Logan's coming in now, mate. Ship off. It's like, poor Kyle. Oh man. So I did see JP's question before, but now I can't find it. But he was asking anyway the mastering. So mastering the best mastering app on iOS. Do you master any of your music using iOS mastering apps? And if so, do you do it in GarageBand? Do you have an app that you like for that, Patrick?
I don't master a huge amount on iOS, but when I do, I like Grand Finale, which is now Grand Finale 2. I haven't had a chance to use Grand Finale 2 yet, but by all accounts, it's bloody brilliant. So that would be my pick on iOS.
Very cool. Yeah, I've always been a Final Touch fan, but which is from what's the name of the company? I can't remember the name of the company to do it. Anyway, they haven't updated. Positive Grid, it is, thank you. They haven't updated in about 5 years, and it's getting a little long in the tooth. There's also been reports that it's not playing nicely with 16.1, so maybe this time, now that Clevgran have indeed popped this one out here, Grand Finale 2, which by all reports works fairly similarly in terms of the functionality, but has a much better design and interface and looks a bit more modern and has the ability to control.
Is that $9.99 an upgrade price, or is it just $9.99?
I think it's just standalone $9.99. I think.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think Grand Finale. Yeah, and again, we could get into the behind the scenes of app developers and whether they should make things an upgrade or whether they should improve their original apps or whether they produce. I mean, just look at Cubase. I probably should. Like that is a really good price. Yeah, it must be standalone because this is only available. Yeah, which is that would be US by the looks of it. We're in the US store there. Yeah, so it'll be $14.99 Australia and probably $14.99 in pounds or euros because we pay more. If you're in the US and you're worried about prices, I just think we pay more. But yeah, Grand Finale. Grand Finale is a good midpoint there, I reckon, because there's things like Audio Master Pro, which is very simple, wrong button, which is very simple, but doesn't have a lot of features. Final Touch is very complicated, but has all the features. Grand Finale kind of sits in the middle there, where it gives you things like multi-band compression and limiting and all the things that you would want in a mastering app, but it also has some nice presets that you can just throw on there if you're feeling lazy and just want to do a quick job on it. So I would go with that. And I'm pretty sure, as the answer with everything, I think Jade Star has just done a video on Grand Finale 2. There you go. Grand Finale 2 is AUV3. There you go. That is a big update because it means that instead of having to ship your audio out, you could just throw it right on. You could just basically merge down your tracks in GarageBand or use AUM or use anything else you like to link straight into it. So that's what that means.
GarageBand users. As we know, auto-normalization. That's brilliant, absolutely.
Actually, that's a really good point because, you could get around Apple's export engine entirely by just getting it sent directly through an AUV3 plugin and whack it on there. Which is cool. If they had a master track, it would be even easier.
Pete, don't get me started.
Well, I can't get you started, Patrick, because guess what? We're at the end of the show, so we have got a couple of minutes over time. But I wanted to cover up on those last few questions that we had there. Apparently, Grand Finale 2 is $8.99 in the UK today, so it must be a bit of a deal. That's ridiculously good price. I would just go and buy it. Go buy it right now. I don't say that about many things, but go buy that right now. Although we'll say that, and then they'll have a Black Friday sale. It'll be $4.99 a week, and then people will be cursing our names.
That must be the sale price.
It's got to be, doesn't it? Yeah. Jade will know. Go check out her video. Again, the answer to every question we've had here today is go and check Jade's video, and you'll be golden. That is going to have to do it, Patrick. It is always a pleasure. I deliberately wanted to make this show kind of rambly and vague and open ended, but I think we've covered a lot of stuff anyway. In spite of ourselves.
Right man for the job then. Rambly and vague. Thanks.
Rambly and vague. I think that's wasn't that on your website? It's like the GarageBand guide, rambling and vague.
If I was single, it'll be my Tinder profile, I'm sure. Congratulations on hitting 150 episodes, Pete. I'm looking forward to watching 150 more, my friend.
Well, hopefully, yeah. Unless GarageBand does get completely destroyed in the next year, I'm just going to keep on going. But no, it's good. And despite the fact that we've covered off on the fact that there really hasn't been that many changes in the last 3 years, you know why that's good for me and Patrick? Because every single video in our back catalogues is still 100% relevant. So yeah, it just means that we can be lazy and just point to old. Oh, sorry, no, nothing. No, it's all very new and exciting. If folks want to check out, I know many people know exactly where to go, but if you go to thegaragebandguide.com, you can find that bloke there, and you can find out which is the best iOS guitar app. You can learn how to connect your gear to your other gear, what all the apps Patrick uses to create music are, and even whether you can install GarageBand on your Windows or Android device. All that and more at thegaragebandguide.com. Thank you. It's always a pleasure, mate, to have a chat. Thank you to all the wonderful folks who've been hanging out with us here today. If you watching on the replay and you did have a question that we didn't cover, myself and Patrick will be down in the comments section for the next sort of 24 hours or so. So, yeah, if you do have a question, we'll make sure it's there, and just tag Patrick with anything really difficult, and we'll be good to go. Thank you for everyone for being here. As we say at the end of every show, be kind to yourself this week, be kind to others, and don't forget to keep creating. And we'll see you next time here on GarageBand Weekly. Bye for now.